In the late 1700s, Richard Allen, a formerly enslaved devout Methodist and lay minister, accepted an invitation to preach at St. George's Church in Philadelphia. Allen's preaching was very popular, causing a rapid growth of black membership. Soon the church had outgrown its seating capacity. But when Allen requested the church create a second congregation for black people, the white elders refused. Instead, they built a balcony to segregate black members from white members. In 1792, a fellow lay minister, Absalom Jones, challenged this division by sitting downstairs. He was then physically removed during the opening prayer. In response, Richard Allen led the entire black membership out of the building. Later, Allen said of the incident, "We all went out of the church in a body, and they were no longer plagued by us." Allen and Jones each went on to lead their own black congregations. Reverend Allen would eventually form a new denomination, the African Methodist Episcopal Church, the first independent denomination founded by black people in the U.S. Even after the Civil War and the end of slavery, the divide between the white church and the black church remained wide and kept getting wider. In the early 20th century, facing rampant inequality, voter suppression, persecution, and violence, droves of black families moved out of the rural southern United States into urban areas of the Northeast, Midwest, and West in what is called the Great Migration.
Millions of black people left and sometimes had to escape from the South because of the horrid conditions there, and they came north for better opportunity, for better jobs, for better education. It changed the landscape of America.
In 1890, around 90% of black people in the U.S. lived in southern states. Over the next 80 years, nearly 50% would leave the South in an exodus of over 6 million people. The growth of black populations in historically white communities led to another kind of migration.
What we know that happened during the Great Migration is this mass group of African Americans moving into these urban places creates housing problems. And so instead of many cities firmly addressing these housing problems, what typically happens is overcrowding. In conjunction with overcrowding, what happens is that white folks also are leaving neighborhoods.
And that's when you see the growth of the megachurches in the suburbs, because a lot of the churches in the cities were being abandoned by white Protestants, moved to the suburbs, and created kind of these communities in the suburbs that are white, middle, upper middle class communities, as well as white, middle, upper middle class churches. And many of the urban centers became places where ethnic minority churches were started.
Despite the progress of the civil rights movement, school desegregation, and policies like affirmative action, Christian communities have remained highly segregated. As of 2014, nearly 80% of Christians attend churches where they are among the overwhelming racial majority. Unlike most large U.S. institutions, the church is not required by law to integrate. Congregations are made of individuals who intentionally choose to come together, which means a majority of Christians are choosing segregation, making church possibly the most telling measure of where race relations in the United States actually stands. Even well-meaning white congregations who might want to reflect the full diversity of the U.S. population struggle with the reality that their theology and practices are immersed in white cultural norms that alienate people of color.
Our liturgy is constructed a certain way that feeds and fills white Christians. The way that we choreograph our movement around the sanctuary is also very white and very European. The way that we talk, how we keep things under 12 minutes in our sermons, how we sing 3 verses of a hymn, how the hymns always have to be played from the organ or from the piano. Those are constructs that make perfect sense in our mind as being worshipful, but at the same time are excluding.
Why are we singing songs by Germans? Why don't they include any songs from authors and composers that are not white? Who decides that this is the way that we should worship, and this is the way that we should do things.
I remember sitting there when the service was over and thinking, I came in, I sat down, I was prayed over, I was sang to, I was preached at, and I was dismissed. For me, there was no spiritual component to the worship service, and I thought it was very sterile.
Black churches, on the other hand, often focus on Christ as a source of hope and rescue in the face of ongoing oppression, a theology shaped by the history and experience of Black lives in America.
When I have to be able to rise above the pain of the cuts that I receive on a daily basis, when I just need to let go and let God, connecting with people on a much deeper level because of the pain that we have experienced together. It's different than what I could imagine a life where I have everything that I need. I'm not suffering at all. It's just different. It's a different place.
Can Black and white Christianity find common ground? Can the chasm between us, created by racism and white supremacy, be overcome?
There's not enough diversity in our congregations, in our denomination, because we refuse to make space for that diversity.
And so when they talk about racial reconciliation, they don't really want their congregation body to change. They don't really want 50-50 white and people of color. Maybe one or two. Because I think people are comfortable where they're at.
When congregations become multiracial, you will often see a group of white people leave the church. And it's either a fear of change, fear of doing things differently, fear of losing power.
Richard Allen and Absalom Jones left St. George's Church because it was not in fact their church, but a white church they were being allowed to attend. The persistent segregation of churches today raises the question, how much has really changed?
Baptize me, John.
I think it's very hard for us to grasp the depths of the racism inherent inside of our own church. 10 years ago when I was here, if you were to walk into the sanctuary, front and center at the top of the chancel would be this gorgeous painting of a Norwegian Jesus. And it was beautiful and it was inspiring, but anytime anyone who didn't look Norwegian looked at that painting, they never came back. And we all scratched our heads wondering why.
I see a white Jesus. That's telling me that whiteness is good, whiteness is holiness, and that even the Creator, the Savior of the world who came down to love us in physical form is white.
Everything about kind of the history of Christianity from Europe to the U.S. has been built around whiteness. It's just in the DNA of the U.S. church. The church feels very white.
The phrase white Christianity, the phrase, it's an idolatry. Think about it. White Christianity is an idolatry. And what do idols do in the Bible? Idols separate us from God.
How can a church immersed in white supremacy even begin to reconcile its ongoing legacy of exclusion, oppression, and violence? Is it even possible?
Reconciliation, take things that are out of balance and bring them back into balance. But the assumption is that there was a balance to begin with.
Reconciliation implies a prior healthy relationship, which we don't have in the United States. So you can really only speak of reconciliation in theological terms.
There is a white Protestant obsession with reconciliation. Yeah, like, stop. Stop. It's the scariest thing I've ever seen. When do we get to the reconciliation? When do I get to feel good? I don't know. I haven't felt good for 400 years historically in this country. I don't know when you get to feel good about this.
Some Christians have looked to foster unity by embracing the ideology of colorblindness, that we should look past skin color and view everyone as the same. But this is problematic at best.
Colorblindness at a sort of very simplistic level seems like what we should all embrace. The reality is, if I don't see someone's color who's not white, then I don't see the fact that they experience racism.
So I don't see color. That's not reconciliation. That's denial.
But to say we don't see skin color automatically makes me shake, because I'm like, am I invisible?
It basically means I see you as white. I see you like me. I've made you kind of into my own image. And it strips away all difference of culture.
And so people take up their experience and then just lay it over top of me.
Whiteness is going to create whiteness. And white supremacy, once it's embedded in the culture and in the culture of a church, it doesn't give you the tools to dismantle itself.
Try as the church might, we cannot whitewash this issue. White supremacy must be addressed directly, with all the hard truths exposed. Acknowledging our history and breaking down the systems that have upheld whiteness as the norm will be messy. It will be controversial. And above all, it will be painful.
When we talk about racial injustice, when we talk about brokenness in our society, when we talk about churches that are hurting, maybe some of us need to realize it's a funeral service and not a hospital visit. We can't go into the room and say, hey, we're going to just sing Kumbaya and join hands and say, I love you, man, and things are going to be okay. We've got to deal with the dead body that is in the room. Because to be blunt, most of the dead bodies in American history are black and brown and red bodies. And if we ignore the dead bodies and we don't lament over the dead bodies, we're just kind of playing the games of faith here. We're just pretending that things are okay when they're really not.
In the book of Lamentations, the Israelites, after turning away from God, were exiled into Babylon. They had lost everything. Yet God does not offer them hope of deliverance from their plight.
God doesn't call them to reclaim their strength and to go back and make Jerusalem great again. Right? That's not the call. The call is enter into a space of lament.
Make a joyful noise unto the Lord, all ye lands. Come before his presence. Come before his presence with singing.
But in the case of modern white Christianity, there seems to be an aversion to lamentation.
The church in America is lousy at engaging suffering and pain and lament. And most churches, when they get to a lament psalm, a psalm that talks about suffering, or a lament hymn in their liturgical reading or in their liturgical worship, they skip it. They drop it. We're talking about a pretty profound act of disobedience to God, to skip over the parts of the scriptures that make us uncomfortable.
Reality is there is no resurrection without crucifixion. And we're going to have to go to those painful places. We're going to have to acknowledge the things within us that have to die so that Christ can rise and live in and through us.
In exposing issues, it gets really bad because you're exposing this wound. And the first thing is recognizing that we have a wound. And I think we're in that kind of messiness right now of saying we have a problem.
We have to let go of what we think is right. We have to let go of what we believe we know. We have to let go of the structures that we thought were the right way to worship God.
God calls us to stand together as a diverse body, to humbly and courageously name and renounce the root causes that divide us. Confronting white supremacy